Good morning, friends. I was thinking about this topic yesterday and I was reminded of a scene from one of my favorite movies. And of course, I ended up watching the movie because I wanted to watch it again. It is a very old movie. It's a Bengali movie made on the life of Ramakrishna, who was a great avatar who lived in the 19th century. And I think it's from the 1950s, but it has subtitles. You can all watch it, you can find it on YouTube. It's a very, very beautifully made movie, and the actor who plays Ramakrishna does a spectacular job. And every detail, almost every line, every dialogue is exactly from Ramakrishna's biography, so it's very accurate. And there's a scene in this movie, to give you some context for those of you that don't know, Ramakrishna was this great avatar. He was more than a saint. That's how Yogananda describes him in the autobiography of a yogi. He lived outside Kolkata in the 19th century, and he was a priest at this very famous Kali temple in this tiny little town called Dakshineshwar. And he was very devoted to Kali. And Ramakrishna had a childlike spirit, and you can see this beautifully portrayed in the movie. And for a long time, for the first many years of his life, until about 30, 35 years, everybody thought this man was just crazy. They knew he was very childlike and pure, but nobody really knew what his spiritual stature was. He was a priest who kept talking to Divine Mother all the time, and he was a very nice man, but also he was just off. He didn't relate to the world, and nobody could understand why he was doing what he was doing. And at one point in his life, there is this lady who herself is a teacher. She's a tantric practitioner, and she is guided in a vision to come to Dakshineshwar and meet Ramakrishna and to guide him in some practices. So she is just, she comes by the Ganges, she comes on a boat, and she comes to this place, to this temple, and she sees Ramakrishna, and she says, I saw your face in my vision, and I was sent here to help you, to guide you in some practices. So Ramakrishna says, oh, sure, why not? So he starts working with this lady, and she starts teaching him, and just in a few days, she realizes that this is not an ordinary man. Whatever she came to teach him, he already knew all of that, and he had excelled in all the practices that she was trying to share with him. So she tells him, I don't know what you think about any of this. I know you're very, childlike, and you sort of live in your own world, but I think you're a self-realized being. You're an avatar. And Ramakrishna just looks at her and says, oh, do you think so? And then the movie is so funny, this scene, it's not meant to be funny, but almost amusing in a way. So there's this other man named Mathur Babu. He's the sort of the administrative head of the temple. All of these men really, really respect and look up to Ramakrishna. They know he is a very saintly soul. So, and then he comes to meet, this lady and Ramakrishna tells Mathur Babu, Mathur Babu, she thinks I'm God realized, that everybody should be worshiping me. And then Mathur Babu looks at him like, really? And then he looks at this lady, and this lady says, I do think so. I do think he's a self-realized soul, that he's not just an ordinary saint, that he is God-realized, that he has no ego left. And then, she says, I don't know how we will settle this case. I don't think he should just be a priest sitting here, doing his own stuff. I think people should be coming to him, and he should have his own spiritual work. And then she says, maybe we get all the scholars, all the religious experts from all over the country, we gather them in a conference, and then we can get to decide whether he is indeed who I think he is and who he also now agrees that he is. So, Ramakrishna is very excited about all of this. He's just like a 6-year-old boy. And then there's this conference that is called of all the scholars from all over the country, and they debate about Ramakrishna, and he's just sitting there and watching all of this. And then they ask him questions, and then he answers all those questions, and he just says, I just play with my mother Kali, and he says, sometimes she's separate from me, and we just play this game, but actually she's just me. She's not separate from me. So he goes on like this, and at the end of this whole conference, they all decide, yeah, he is indeed an avatar. And then he just sits there. But the most amusing part of all of this is what really happened. And then Mathur Babu, who was actually very close to Ramakrishna, he doesn't know how to really grasp any of this because he has known this man since he was a boy, and maybe he didn't know, is this true? This man who I thought was always a little foolish and off, is he really God realized? Was I missing something all this time? And then he goes, that night, he walks out of his room, And then Ramakrishna gives him this experience. He's just walking and he suddenly sees all the different deities that he was worshipping in Ramakrishna's form. And again, he approaches Ramakrishna and says, I don't know if my mind is playing tricks on me. I don't know if this is an optical illusion or you're playing some tricks. Is this true, what I'm seeing? That all the gods that I worship are actually in front of me, in your form. And Ramakrishna, again, just like a child, yeah, it is true. It is in fact true. I'm one with all those gods. I am in fact fully self-realized. And then he goes on to say, you're so lucky. You're so lucky you got to see this. Anyway, so I was thinking of this story, and how often when we think of saints and being without ego, we often imagine that to be rather self-effacing. We think humility is something where you put yourself below everyone else and you don't say anything good about yourself. You don't do anything that actually shows your greatness or somehow emphasizes any importance that you have. And all of that is true. But as we progress spiritually and as these masters show, as Yogananda did, as Ramakrishna did, and even Swami Kriyananda, humility looks very different when there is no ego. Yogananda used to say, how can there be humility when there is no consciousness of self? And this beautiful chant that Keshava was sharing today morning, I am but an empty vessel. And to even sit with that affirmation, what does it feel like when you have no personality left? You have no agenda. You have no reason to be going through the experiences that you're going through except to be a channel for something greater, except just to serve and love. And these masters set an example for us. They set an example for us not just by living that, but also showing us how do we want to live. What is the way for us to live so that we don't have to be bound by that consciousness of limited self. The other story I was reminded of yesterday, it's from the book written by Dr. Viktor Frankl. I know many of you may have heard of this man. He was an Austrian neurologist and a psychiatrist. And there's this very famous best-selling book called Man's Search for Meaning. I highly recommend it. And Dr. Frankl himself had a very interesting life. He was a Jewish person in Austria during World War II, and he was taken by the Nazis, and he was in Auschwitz. He endured many, many years of torture himself in the prison. And he writes his experiences. I want to share a story of one of his patients, but just to give you some background about who he is, he writes about his experiences in the prison, which is what led him to create this huge work later on in his life. And he talks about how when people go through such dehumanizing conditions, even the worst of adversities and suffering, some people are completely crushed and some people survive. And the people that survive are those who are able to find meaning in suffering, that they can find some sort of meaning in the experiences that they are going through. And he goes on to say, this meaning that we find, that's the word that he uses a lot, but you can also substitute it with other synonyms from the yogic path. He goes on to say, the way we find this meaning, you can find it in many different ways, and everybody's path is unique. All of us just have to go on our own individual spiritual journey to understand what is my next step for growth, for expansion. But the one common theme that he presents is it involves some kind of transcending your own self. That if our whole reality, if our life is all limited to I, me, mine, we cannot find meaning. We cannot even go through these adversities or suffering without actually being crushed. Anyway, the story I wanted to share is later on, he, of course, had a very wonderful practice. He helped many, many souls. He wrote many books, and he created his own system of counseling and psychology. And once he was sitting with this very old man, a doctor, who had lost his wife. And this doctor, had lived many, many decades, and obviously he had had a very happy and beautiful marriage. And he was chronically depressed because his wife had just left. And Dr. Frankl writes this experience, recounting his own counseling session with this doctor. He said, I didn't know what to tell him. I didn't want to offer any piece of advice or counsel, but rather I asked him a question. If instead of your wife dying, if you are the person who left this world, and if she was here sitting in front of me, how do you think she would feel? Excuse me, I just have to a sip of water. And then to that, the old man says, Of course, she would be so devastated, she would be so depressed, and she wouldn't be able to bear that. And then Dr. Frankl goes on to ask, what if? What if you're suffering right now, the burden you're carrying is your act of love that you spared her from that morning? And of course, immediately the man left, his heart was lifted up. And Dr. Frankl goes on to say there was no other conversation that happened in that session, and he never saw that man again. He also goes on to say, when you find meaning in suffering, suffering itself somehow loses its power. It stops to exist in our life. And thinking of it from a more spiritual, or rather from the spiritual vocabulary, what we are talking about is suffering and how it is anchored with the ego. What we are talking about as meaning is that which transcends the little self. And how do we find that? We can say easily that ego is the cause of all suffering, but it's rather abstract. It's an abstract statement that doesn't really mean anything to us. What do you do about that? We all still have to work with our own God-given faculties, our mind, our thoughts, our power, and all of that to go through life and find our way of realizing that we are not just this little self. We are not here just to think about I, me, mine. Swami Kriyananda made a statement once. He said, I see the myth of Swami Kriyananda swirling around me. I read this statement only, I came to Ananda very late, in Swami Kriyananda's life. We had a very brief window of interaction, so I didn't have any personal relationship with him, except sitting in many lecture halls and events where he was giving talks. And when I read this statement, which was a few years after his passing, it was so vivid for me. I'm sure for any of you who are in this room right now who were present when Swamiji was here, you could see the myth all the time. I remember even one of the events we did here in Foothill College, he had to be escorted out to his car because obviously so many people were thronging to see him, to be blessed by him. And once I was in Ananda village and we were having a pool party of some sort. I don't know what event it was. And Swamiji was there. And it was an odd setting for me. I was very new to Ananda, but I was already a disciple for a few years with Yogananda. And I was really taken with Swamiji. And I was there. It was almost surreal for me. I didn't know what I was expecting. I go to Crystal Hermitage, which is the place in Ananda village where Swami lived, and this is where he was greeting people. And there were probably, I don't know how many people were there. There were probably only a few hundred people, not thousands. But it was so chaotic. It was so chaotic because, first of all, we didn't know when he was going to show up, whether he was going to greet people, whether he was going to bless. It was all very unclear. But also, everybody was just doing their own thing. People were now trying to see if they could greet him. There were people that were trying to, create space, put chairs, be in the kitchen serving food. And there were so many people who would just sit in random spots and meditate. Swami was sitting here somewhere behind there. Somebody would be sitting and meditating. And I was very confused. Just what's happening here? It all looks so chaotic. And then when I read the statement years after Swami's passing, I understood what it meant. I see the myth of Swami Kriyananda swirling around me. And what was most touching for me, I look back, and again, like I said, I didn't have a personal relationship. I might have had brief interactions or blessings from Swamiji, but really not in the way others spent time with him or even conversations. I didn't have any of those opportunities in this life. But I look back and I clearly remember he was in fact untouched. He was in fact untouched by all of the chaos that was constantly swirling around him. There was so much happening and it was so confusing, but he was just who he was. He never subscribed or he never allowed all of that to dictate what he was going to do. He was calm, he was peaceful, he did what he wanted to do. We were never sure until he sat and he started chatting with people. It was never clear whether he was actually going to greet everybody because we weren't sure how long he was actually going to stay there. But then at some point he decided that he did want to greet and bless people. And then somewhere in there he also decided that he wanted to bless every single person and greet every person that had come that day. So that was going to take about 2.5 hours, and that's what he did. It was just an interesting experience for me to just be there in that setting and to watch how could somebody be so untouched by so much chaos, not just chaos, but everything that was spinning with them as the vortex in the center. It is so hard to even comprehend what it feels like, or when you don't have such a strong sense of self, when you're not feeling self important, when you're not always consumed and calculating your own advantage in every situation. What does life look like? It is almost a wonderful contemplative exercise to sit with. What does life look like if I was not always calculating my advantage? And I don't mean in a bad way. I don't mean we are all selfish or egotistical or anything, but we are always calculating our advantage. James and I joke about this all the time. He believes that it's better to take Alma and Central to the community, and I believe it's better to take El Camino, and we have our own reasons. And you might belong, again, in Monroe Drive, I'll share this also. All of us who live in the community, we have this very, very, very interesting, it almost says so much about you just based on this one decision you take. When you enter Monroe Drive, the Monroe Drive is a loop. This is where our community is. And you can either take the first left and go like this and you would reach our community, or you can go straight. There's actually 3 options. I won't confuse you right now. But almost all of them take the same amount of time. You can argue otherwise. But, maybe even if there is a difference, it's about 1 or, between 15 and 30 seconds, let's just say. But everybody is strongly committed, including me. We are all strongly committed to which route we will take when we enter Monroe Drive to go to the community. All of us, we are so busy always calculating our advantage. And not in a bad way. That's what we're meant to do. We're just moving through life. Is it hot today? Do I want to wear a sweater? What do I want to have for lunch? Do I want to go there today? When do I want to go to bed? What do I want to do when I wake up in the morning? And we are programmed that way. There's nothing wrong with that. But how fascinating it would be if we could actually live in this awareness that this is not about me, that I don't have to take myself as personally as I do. Swami Kriyananda, when somebody asked him a very deep philosophical question about the spiritual path, he gave a very serious but a rather simple answer. He said, the entire spiritual path is about overcoming the ego and realizing that God is the doer. And we have heard that statement a lot. It was something that Yogananda said, and it's not even specific to Yogananda or Swami Kriyananda. I'm sure this statement has been used in other places and context, to realize that God is the doer. But what does that really mean? Lakshmi shared a story last week when she was giving her talk here. Again, when Swamiji was living in Mount Washington, he was giving a talk in the Hollywood Church. This was in the 40s. And then he was hearing Yogananda give this counsel, see God as a doer. So he actually decided to put it into practice. He just stood like this here, like I'm standing now, and he just waited for God to speak through him. And he said he waited a whole 2 minutes. And God didn't speak, and then he had to speak. Now, of course, I'm not going to do that. I don't have that kind of courage. But what does it mean when we say God is a doer? Before I finish, that's really what I wanted to share, some practical ways in which how we can live that. What does it mean in our own lives to see God as a doer? And there are so many ways to approach this, just as everybody's spiritual journey is their own unique path. But a couple of things that I want to share with you, just from my own experience, of how we can put this into practice, how we can feel that God is the doer. The first one is through energy and our own physical body. Because anytime we are doing something, even when you're sitting and thinking, there is life force flowing in your body. There is energy. There is will. If you were to tune into it, you're constantly thinking and doing and planning because there is a will behind all of this. There is an intention. And if you were to pause just for a second and think about this life force, this energy, this will, what if this was not centered in me? What if this was from a cosmic source? And to feel that it is from a cosmic source and to become aware of that in our actions is to realize that God is the doer. And it's actually not that hard if you try to practice it. It becomes simple and practical. To just, even when you move your body, when you do anything, it doesn't matter when you drive your car or go write an email or go have a bagel outside, just to feel even the movement in your body, this energy that you feel. Where is this coming from? Is this coming just from metabolism or, whatever the mechanism that this body is? Because obviously this has an expiry date on it. It has an intelligence that even science does not understand. What is the source of this? This life force that is flowing through me, this energy, is divine in its source. And Even more practically, I'll give you one more tip. If ever you remember during your day to practice this affirmation or to this visualization, take two fingers and put it in your medulla right here and to massage your medulla. And as you do that, to pause and close your eyes and to lift your attention here. And you will feel, I promise you, if you were to do this, even in the middle of activity, in the middle of your day, because this is that point where that plug is connecting into the socket. This is where that life force, that energy, that will is flowing into our body. That's what yoga teaches us. And even to physically touch reminds us, it affirms us, not just as a mental idea, but to feel it, that energy is coming into me. And the energy that I'm feeling right now, some days we feel more of it than others. When we are sick or bedridden, we obviously don't feel it as much. And all of us one day will be, at a stage in our lives where it's not as dynamically flowing through our bodies as it once did. However, if we realize that I'm not the source of it, that it is flowing through me, then we start to live in a different state of awareness. And again, whether or not we are able to do it every second of every minute, even to remind ourselves as often as we can is very, very powerful. And that's what it means to imagine or to feel that God is the doer. I remember many, many years ago, I was trained in Indian music, classical music growing up, and I was not a concert artist or a performer in that way, but occasionally I would have opportunities to perform, especially in temples and such, which I really enjoyed. I was very grateful because I didn't have that kind of very refined professional training. And once, right after I graduated college, I was studying with a music teacher, and she said, they want you to sing in this temple for this program, and it's a full-on concert. It's just you. They just want you to perform. I was thrilled. Really? I was so grateful for the opportunity. I was excited, and I was preparing, and I was sort of tuning into this performance, expecting that date. And believe it or not, a week before the performance, the most dreaded thing for any singer happened to me. My throat started getting a little scratchy. And then as the days passed, it went from a little scratchy to full on, I can't speak right now, I don't want to talk on the phone kind of throat scratchy. And it was clear to me that I had some sort of an infection or whatever. I was heavily disappointed, but it was not like I was totally crushed. And, I had to tell my teacher, I can't do this. I called up those people, you have to replace me with somebody else, which was not hard, which all went fine, except that I felt like I had lost an opportunity. It was not going to come again after at least a year or so. Interestingly, just a few days after the whole thing happened, I was sitting with my teacher in her house, which is where I went to sing with her. And perhaps it was all the energy that was building up in me in terms of just preparing and just expecting to be part of that beautiful music. We had a wonderful time. And she looked at me after our class and she said, I have never heard you sing like this. That was really stellar. You're doing great. You're doing a very good job. And I went home and I was fairly amused because it made me realize that whatever I thought I had so much control over, which I wanted to do, which was mine, suddenly I had no say. I had no say when it was going to happen, when it was not going to happen. Some skill, some ability that I had identified with so deeply, I realized was just a gift. It was just a gift that I would have today, and I may not have tomorrow, and I may have day after tomorrow, and again, not the day after that. And when I realized that, I've thought about that, and that, not just that instance, but just again, with my tryst with music over the years, it has become very obvious to me that whenever I sing, and whenever I like what I sing, or whenever I feel like the music is beautiful, I'm always so grateful because I feel that it is a gift. And what that made me do is always to offer that back, to always remember that I'm not singing to an audience. I'm always singing to God. And for me personally, I'm always singing to my guru. I'm always singing to Yogananda because that's my offering. Because this gift, I don't know why it was given to me. Today it's there, tomorrow it may not be there. And that is the other way. To feel that God is a doer is to offer everything back. To offer everything back, whatever thought, whatever action, whatever ability, whatever skills, whatever we have, to remember you're doing this for God. You're serving the world. You might be, fighting climate change. You might be doing dishes in your apartment. You might be gardening. Whatever it is, you're actually not serving anybody. You're not serving yourself. You're not serving anybody around you. You are doing all of that, but you're serving God in them. And in that sense, when we start living with this attitude, everything becomes an act of self offering. The poem God, 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 Yogananda ends with this beautiful verse. He says, in waking, eating, working, sleeping, serving, meditating, chanting. Pretty much lists everything that you do. The whole poem is an affirmation of that dissolution of ego. He says, in all of these things I do, my mind will never stop humming. My soul will never stop humming, God, God, God. What does that mean? It is to see God as the doer, but not just in action, but also to give that action back to God, to offer everything that we are, to feel that energy flowing through the medulla, but also remember, offer all of it back at the spiritual eye, at the feet of the divine. You're serving God. When you're speaking to God. Swami said when he was giving talks and he was teaching, he was always talking to Yogananda sitting in the room, and somebody asked him, but why would you be preaching to your own teacher? It is a very fair question. It's almost ironical. He was not teaching to Yogananda that was already awakened and present and fully in that form. He was speaking for Yogananda to be awakened in each person in the audience, that they could feel that resonance with their own highest potential when they were hearing Swami speak, which is what everyone did. So in that sense, all that we do becomes a reminder for what it is that we are serving, who it is that we are serving. We are always serving God. All our actions are oriented towards God. I'll end with this one quote by Rabindranath Tagore, which Jyotish not too long ago quoted in a talk. And it's a very beautiful poem and almost an affirmation that you want to put on your refrigerator or your computer wall or something like that. The poem goes like this. It's a verse from a poem. I slept and dreamed that life was joy. I woke up and realized that life was service. I served, and behold, service was joy. We don't get to feel God. We don't get to dissolve the ego unless we allow that energy, that willpower to flow through us. And when we start tuning in, while we do that, we realize that is joy, that is God. God bless you.